gives me so much pleasure to bring this individual on stage. I have seen Chidi host and tell stories for several years now. They inspire me, they make me want to become a better storyteller. And I'm going to use this phrase several times, but I thank my lucky stars that I have him here tonight. So, ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, would you please welcome very warmly Chidi.
Hello, everyone. Well, since you know I'm cheating. Look, in this journey of life, you sometimes have these events which are really massive. These are not just little events, these are huge events. And there's a sort of me before that event, and there's me after that event. And they're like chapters, you know. One chapter ends, a whole new chapter begins. And when you look back at these events, you're sometimes overcome with emotion and incredible feelings because your life has changed. Well, I'm not going to tell one of those stories tonight. Just other people who do better. So I will try and keep things grounded and I'll deal with something that I think is a bit more familiar. And we've all had, like we're all gathered here today, and we've all had parties or events that we're at. And there are these trays, you know, on the tray you could have cookies, or you could have vegan sausages, but there's a pile of stuff that you can eat and nibble, and we all nibble away, and eventually there's only one left. And when there's only one left, you know, that one being there, I've noticed you can tell a lot about people's characters by their relationship to that last cookie or sausage. You have some people who ignore it, pretend it's not there. They have some people who look at it and want it, but they don't get it because they know if they get it, you'll see them getting it. You think, oh, that's a greedy person. You have some people who simply don't care. They just grab it, nibble away, and look at you in the eye. So, I'm none of these. But I just thought I'd go way, way back to when I was still young and perhaps a bit more foolish than I am now. And I need to set a few things up. So forget about my accent, I'm Nigerian. I'm from a place called Ohafia, which is in the southeast of Nigeria. And it's very typical that around Christmas, what is Christmas here? This is the middle of our dry season, so there is no harvesting. It's where everybody, all the people who live abroad, who live somewhere else, they come back to the hometown. And this is an incredible, absolutely, it's the best thing you can imagine because you've got, everyone has this extended family. The families are huge. So you have all these people you haven't seen for a year, and it's like, what are you up to? And the best thing is that people have a lot of weddings, and you don't need an invite. You just go with somebody you know, and somebody there will know you or know your mum or know your dad, and it's just this 2-week-long party around Christmas. So in my family, my extended family, we have this thing that is on the 27th of December. The whole family comes together, and we come together in a place that is, we call that Aunt Myrtle's house, and I'll explain a bit more about that. So you have to imagine that we have compounds, so you'd see a sort of main house, and then there'd be all these bits, these extensions. Some are huts, some are smaller houses. But this main house has this area where you sort of receive people. And Aunt Myrtle is an interesting character. I mean, first of all, Myrtle isn't a Nigerian or Igbo name. It was actually, her real name is Nkem, but somehow she got Myrtle. And what was really funny for us as kids, Aunt Myrtle actually looked like a turtle. It's a silly thing, I know it's a very silly thing, but she really did. So we thought, when we were kids, we thought, oh, she's called Myrtle because she looks like a turtle. No, she actually was called Myrtle, and she was very deliberate and very slow. But, you know, but she was really cool because what had happened, and I'll give a bit of, micro history here, is that in 1960, Nigeria became independent. A lot of people, my father included, when they went to study, they went abroad to study. So her son went to Cardiff, and on one of the visits, she had gone to visit him in Cardiff, she had fallen in love with muffins. So if you think of Nigerian culture, Nigeria isn't really a country, it's many countries in one, but in none of them. So all the cultures of Nigeria here, and then muffins are over there. And then Myrtle, her love of muffins, she took the muffins from there and took them to Nigeria, to Ahafia in the southeast. And so on the 27th, we've got the whole family, millions and millions and millions of all my extended family. And there's stuff going on, okay, maybe not millions, but a lot. Okay, but there's all this stuff going on. And she would make these 3 trays of muffins. These were muffin mountains. They were massive. And it wasn't just that there were lots of muffins, but Aunt Myrtle's muffins were incredible. I mean, really, if you bit into one of those muffins, your brain would just go, that would happen in your head. And the nice thing is, as kids, because our parents were quite strict, but as kids, on the 27th of December, if you had eaten one of Aunt Myrtle's muffins, you could misbehave. And nothing would happen to you because they would know it was the effect of those muffins was so strong. So, I mean, this was general life sort of, I noticed the muffins, and we'd have muffins every year, 27th of December. We'd all go back to the village or the hometown and we'd have these muffins. And I didn't think of anything serious about them until I was 7. So one day, on the 27th, I'm 7, and I see these 2 kids who are about 5, and they're crying. And I'm saying, why are you crying? And then they tell me, Uncle Ikenga, and I'll just say a thing, that every man or woman who is related is an uncle or an aunt. So even if they're not, that's just how it is. But they were crying, and they said, Uncle Ikenga took the last muffin. And in our culture, an older person is right. It doesn't matter what, they are right. There's nothing you can do about it, they are right. I'll give an example. This same Uncle Ikenga, he once said he had a 25-carat gold pen. And I, being a smarty pants, I said, well, you can't have a 25-carat gold pen. They're only 24 carats, and 24 carats is too soft. And I got into a lot of trouble because you're not meant to correct an older person. They are correct. It's very frustrating, but that's the way it is. So anyway, so these 2 kids are crying because they had gone for the last muffin. I never thought about the last muffins before, but they'd gone for the last muffin. And Uncle Ikenga wanted it, and he just pushed them, a grown man. A grown man, he just pushed his kids out. And so, of course, they're upset. They don't get the muffin. And so that's when I started thinking about the last muffin. I never thought of it before. So when I'm 8, I'm watching, and I notice Uncle Ikenga gets it again. When I'm 9, he gets it again. When I'm 10, he gets it again. When I'm 11, he just always had that last muffin. And it becomes a kind of obsession. Once a year, I want to know who's going to have the last muffin. So by the time I'm 14, I realize that unless he dies, I didn't have thoughts of death, but unless he died, he would keep getting this last muffin. And I didn't want the last muffin, I just wondered how come he always got it. So by this time I know it's him. So all the kids knew it was him, the adults couldn't care. Then I wanted to know, how did he do it? Because he'd sort of disappear, and then suddenly you'd see him with his sort of puffy cheeks. And that last muffin. I wondered, how did he do it? So I began to watch him, and it took a long, long, long time. So what you have to imagine, in this central area, you've got this sort of big, big room. There are 2 doors at the back, and there are 2 doors at the front. And the front part is of the compound. There was this massive tree there, and that's where we generally hang out. But then the stuff that didn't need the sunlight, like muffins, was on inside there. So kids and people would just go and get some stuff. And I'm watching, and he would always somehow get this muffin. And so I'm wondering, how does he do it? So I start studying, as you do. And by the time I was 17, I noticed something quite interesting. He would go into this sort of small hut on the side. So we've got the main bit there. He'd go into that small hut, And then about 5 minutes later, he would appear with that last muffin. But how he got to that hut was quite amazing, because there was only one door in, and at the back it had 2 windows, which were barred. And yet he would always appear. I don't know how he did it. So I'm behind this tree, so you have to imagine I'm watching everything here. So the next year I'm watching, he goes in now, watching. And then suddenly I hear a noise, and he's coming there with the muffin. And again, until, by sheer coincidence, I had actually hurt the shoulder. So that meant I couldn't lean this way. I had to lean this way, and that meant I'm on the other side of the tree, looking at that front door. But not only did I see the front door, I could now see the side of the house, that little hut. And so I'm watching the front door, he's gone in, and I kid you not, the rear window, including the frame, I saw this frame out of the window. And out creeps Uncle Ikenga. But that's not all. He goes, there's this table with this long tablecloth. Suddenly, he disappears, and I see this table just moving along from the little hut to the main house. And I thought, oh, is that how you do it? Okay. This inspired me to next year to get, I don't really like the last of anything, but I decided I was getting that last muffin. So I tried the next year, he beat me. And I decided to do some personal training to focus on how do you get the last muffin. I read all the books on strategy that were available. There weren't that many, but I read them. And I began to train. And I trained myself. And I came up with plans. You know, not tactics, strategy, just so you all know. So the next year, I am ready. And I'm just there, sort of doing my thing. And I see Uncle Ikenga disappear. And then he goes into that place. And I know it's going to take me about 1 minute 35 seconds to move into the other place. So I head in. As I'm on my way, my mum calls me, Chiboy. She said, and you can't ignore your mum. I mean, here you can, but not there. So my mum says, oh, I want you to meet this person. And I'm thinking the time. And I'm sort of hopping around. Then she says, what's wrong with you? Do you want to go and pee? And I thought, great idea. I said, yes, I have to go and pee. So I ran off, go into the room. As I get in, I see Uncle Ikenga coming from that last door. And there on the table is a single muffin. And I look at him, he looks at me. I look back at him, I look at the muffin. He looks at the muffin, he looks at me, I look at him, both look at the muffin. Okay? And then I run. I run at this muffin. And I actually used to like rugby. I don't care so much for football, I like rugby. And I'd once seen a guy score a try, he sort of dived, and his hand just went bonk like that, and he put the ball behind the line. So I'm diving towards this last muffin. In the air, remember I'm much younger, much more agile, floating through the air with my hand like this. Bam! I got that muffin. A split second later, his hand comes on there. But remember, I've been training myself. You need finger strength. So I spent about, I don't know, 3 or 4 months sort of doing finger strength, putting my body up there. I've done all kinds of stuff. My left hand, you have to understand, the left hand, I want to go and grab that hand, take that hand off. But then he grabs my left hand, so we've got this. And then this hand is here, he's applying pressure, and we're kind of in a stalemate. To the outside world, this would look like a stalemate. Okay? And so he's really, what he wants to do, he's the kind of person who would rather squash the muffin than get the muffin. So I'm keeping that muffin, I'm protecting this muffin. Then, with this hand, we go forward and then we come back. We go forward and we come back. And it's almost like, you know, sometimes, I don't know, but when I was young, you had a film, I think, with, you had this guy, Clint Eastwood. And if he was on a cowboy film, then they'd show his eyes, he was sort of looking like this. And so I'm kind of eyeballing my uncle, and I'm probably a few beads of perspiration. But generally speaking, you could say I was cool, calm, and composed. However, I'm sure all of you know this one. You know this voice in our head. I have a sort of, we all talk to ourselves. And when I'm in stressed situations, I just have a completely different accent. So even though I'm out there being very cool, on the inside it's sort of like, Muffin, Muffin, Muffin. And it's just ridiculous. And we're pushing and it's getting really, really hectic. However, now we get to the strategy, because all great wars, they're not won with strength, it's the brain. I knew that when your hands are rubbing together, what happens here? They get sweaty. So what I had done, on the morning of the 27th, every 30 minutes, I would layer hand lotion. Okay. I know this may sound silly, but I put layers and layers of hand lotion. Layer would dry, I put a new layer. Layer would dry, put a new layer. So, you can imagine Uncle Ikenga with his hand here trying to swash it, and this other one, they begin to sweat. And when perspiration mixes with layers of hand lotion, it begins to slip. So he's now trying to grab this, but his hand is slipping, which means he's consuming a lot of energy. A huge amount of energy is just going in. And I'm waiting, and I'm biding my time to know what I'm doing. And I can see him, slowly the confidence begins to disappear. He's getting worried. First of all, he's an older person, and it's just so bad that a young person beats an older person. You know, now that I'm an old person, I know what it feels like. So he's getting worried, he's slipping, and then I've got this new move. So what happens is, I push forward. Then I pull this hand out because it's all slippery, so I can get my hand out. The idea is for this hand to knock this hand away, but what he does is that he takes the hand on this one to grab my hand that is pulled back, and then we have to discuss the laws of physics, because he's pushing down and I'm kind of resisting, but once the downward pressure disappears suddenly, this hand is going to fly up into the air, which it does, it flies up into the air. And something happens that makes me say, goodness gracious. Now, you don't know, a few people know me, but you know, I'm not a goodness gracious kind of person. So I say things like, I don't know, golly gee wee, but I just don't say goodness gracious. But something happened, and you have to figure out why would I say goodness gracious. I'll tell you why I said goodness gracious, because as this hand goes up into the air, from here, this little kid who had been watching the action zooms across. First of all, I'm wondering, how do you get that kind of acceleration? The kid flies across, knocks the last muffin to the end of the table where his friend grabs it, splits it in two, he slides over there, they give each other one half. And that should be, I mean, that's the goodness gracious part. But the next bit is really, really bad, especially from my culture, because what goes up will come down. And Uncle Ikenga, deciding that he couldn't get the muffin with his hand, was going to go with his head. So that meant his head is moving to where the muffin was, as my hand is coming down at incredible velocity, and there's a smack. And I know that, because I've lived long enough in the Netherlands and England to know that you can sort of sometimes hit an older person. But in Ohafia, where I'm from, Ohafia, just a little diversion, hold it there, you've got an uncle who's just been slapped on the head, so just keep that image. Ohafia, we are known, ask any Nigerian, we were known as mercenaries. We have something called the Ohafia war dance, where originally we'd have 3 skulls, and then the Brits came and just messed everything up and said, no, you have to do papier-mâché. But that's who we are. We bear a grudge. And so I've hit my uncle Of course, you can imagine during this whole setup, people have seen it, people are watching, and they see me slap my uncle on the head, and the only thing I can do is run. I ran off. I was in Cameroon in about 1 hour. You know, it's just one of those things. So eventually, it took United Nations and a few years of mediation to get around back into the village. And I sometimes think back to that afternoon, and I said, did I learn anything from it? Because usually when things like this happen, and I didn't really learn very much. But I can say this, I can say just a little thing in closing, is that sometimes you have this thing in your head, and there's a voice that says, I'm not sure that's such a good idea. Now, had I listened to that voice, I wouldn't be able to stand here and tell you about the last Aunt Myrtle's muffin. So maybe we did learn something. Thank you very much.